The following program is an independent production, apart from DJDP Productions. The views, opinions, and ideas of the producers of The Darkest Hour do not necessarily reflect those of the staff of DJDP Productions, its partners or affiliates. The producers of The Darkest Hour with Amanda Jane of Forget Me Not assume all responsibility for the content of its program. Should you have questions or concerns regarding The Darkest Hour with Amanda Jane, please contact the producers directly. Or you may also contact the staff at Neo Retro FM through email at djdphoenix@protonmail.com. Be sure to include the date of the program and the subject matter you're inquiring about. And now, Neo Retro FM presents The Darkest Hour with Amanda Jane, streamed live from Marysville, Washington.
For tomorrow, we embark on the darkest hour.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me, Amanda Jane, for a very special episode of The Darkest Hour. We are officially at our 10th episode, which wouldn't even be possible without all of you. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for listening. Now, with all of that said, we've got a packed show tonight. So, let's get started, shall we? Even from a very young age, I knew I was different. I was around 8 months old when I experienced my first taste of my life to come. It was early afternoon and I was sleeping in a white crib in the corner of what seemed like a very large, mostly empty room. The walls were salmon pink, and there was a small window overlooking a large playing field. I'm male, so pink walls have always confused me. Later, when I questioned my parents regarding that detail, their explanation was money troubles. They had moved into government housing and had little money to redecorate. I awoke from my slumber facing the wall side of the crib. Now, I don't remember thinking anything. Obviously, I couldn't yet speak and no knowledge of language, but the sense of self I had and level of awareness of my environment, though extremely acute, kind of hyper-aware in a way, very unlike adult, ego-driven consciousness. As I opened my eyes, I could immediately feel something was wrong. I could feel an electrostatic charge buzzing in the air. Even at this young age, my central and peripheral nervous system seemed highly tuned and able to recognize shifts in the space around me. As I turned over, I could see a thick, static haze covering the entirety of the room that seemed to become vastly denser the closer it got to the far left corner of my room. Just beyond the white bars of my crib, two of my favorite toys hung in the air and began to slowly move back and forth. For a short time, this seemed to entertain me, although this was short-lived. My toys' movements became more and more erratic, and I began to feel very uneasy. At this point, I noticed a large mass of gray, electric blue mist emanating from the far left corner of the room. As the seconds passed, an entity seemed to manifest into more of a discernible shape, kind of like a man. However, it seemed like this was masking something far more sinister. This was my first experience of fear. I pulled my little body up and began to shake the crib, screaming at the top of my lungs. After this incident, my memory goes blank until I reach the age of 4. Now, it's important to note that my life has been filled with numerous incidents, too many to go into them all. For the purpose of continuity, I've chosen experiences that all link to the aforementioned happening. As an adolescent, I was terrified of the dark, and every night I would hide under my covers, almost frozen in fear. I would not dare look into the darkness. There is a twist to this, however, as no room is dark to me, and I'll explain. For a long time, as long as I can remember, my vision and ability to sense has been different and heightened. I see with absolute clarity the veil that separates this reality from others, and in darkness this is greatly enhanced. Imagine looking at an old TV that has lost its signal, and the gray, white, and black static picture appears. Now think of that, but more vastly, more refined and in color, overlaid, around and within what you perceive as the space surrounding you. Do this and add an extra dimensional quality to it, which separates the gradually layered realities that you are a part of, and you'll have some idea. Everything has some kind of energetic signature, whether it has form or not. I've spent the last 35 years of my life learning to read the electrostatic mist that consumes my life. I have 3 interlinked experiences to share that have, in a way, defined my life thus far. Experience 1. I'm in my early 20s and I've learned to adapt to a world that has little time for people like me. I have ordinary friends, a good job, and on the surface my life is not unlike your own, but I live 2 lives. One hidden within another, and for the most part, the people in my life are not affected by this, but there are exceptions. My best friend called me up one afternoon, scared out of his mind, asking me to come to his house. I only stayed about 20 minutes by foot from his apartment, so I agreed to come see what was going on. To give a brief background on my friend, he was older than me, and he had a troubled past. As a result, he'd turned to alcohol and drugs as a means of self-medicating, which I was totally against. Over the years, I had seen all kinds of strange and concerning things around him, and I took it upon myself to be there for him, trying to bring him out of despair. I'd arrived at his place within 15 minutes. A leisurely stroll seemed impractical given his frantic state. On arrival, I was expecting the usual scene: beer cans, empty bottles filling his living room. However, upon entering his flat, I could feel something was different. The light outside his front door ominously flickered, and there was a feeling of a cold void, like all the air had been sucked out of the area I was standing in. I walked into the living room and I saw him with his head in his hands, and there seemed to be a very negative vibe permeating the space. Before I spoke to him, I took a second to scan my surroundings. His living room looked like an electromagnetic storm, with sparks of fine blue lightning stabbing at the air. My friend was surrounded by a black-gray haze, moving around him with slow purpose. He looked up at me and said, "Do you see it?" pointing to the far left corner of the room. I asked him what he saw. "The gray thing in the corner." I turned and looked. It took a couple of moments for my vision to tune into the area as there was a heavy amount of distortion hitting my senses after entering the room. What I saw was like a gray mass of what can only be described as pure malevolence, as negative as you could get. This entity was a being of fear, and the cloud of darkness surrounding my friend was it feeding off of his anguish and despair. I immediately moved between this thing and my friend and began attempting to counteract with positive intention, both mentally and from my motivational ways of connecting with him during any kind of downward spiral. This seemed to work. As my friend's mood started to shift, with this came a wave of anger and frustration like a pulse through the air towards my back from this thing. I turned around to my friend's side so that we could face each other, and I said to him, "These beings only have the power that you give them." He looked at me and his eyes lost all the fear, and I could see a righteous anger beginning to appear behind them. We both stood up, and the entity rushed us. met with a shield-like barrier that had formed around both of us, created by our strong connection and unspoken agreement to be brave. Keep in mind, I don't see things like you do. The being diverted to our left and blew out the light bulb in the nearest lamp made us both jump. My friend and I just stood there, looking at one another for what seemed like an eternity. The silence was broken when my friend said, "We need to talk." He was right. Perhaps it was time for me to confide in someone for real. We talked for many hours, and when I left, it was dark outside. My friend, now at ease and in a much better place, said goodnight, and I began to walk home. The entity now long gone is a mere shadow in the back of my mind, like a splinter. This is how many of my experiences end up. Unfortunately, this experience wasn't over yet. As I walked home, I had the feeling of being watched, and every time I walked under a streetlight, it would flicker on and off. I got home quickly and decided to take a shower, turn in for the night. I was in the bathroom getting undressed. I took my gold watch off that my father had given me for my 21st birthday and placed it on the sink. A few moments later, the same cold void feeling came over the room, and my attention was focused on the watch. Right before my eyes, my prized possession vanished into thin air. To this day, my father still assumes that I sold it or something. I've never seen it again. In my mind, I think this being returned to me in an act of retribution to take what I loved as compensation for my involvement and deflection of its sick lust for fear. The weak-willed are always at risk. Experience too. I'm older now, in my late 20s, and my list of friends has become much shorter. My life in ways can be made far more difficult when I'm around certain people. I'm staying with an old friend of the family. We'll call him Baker. He's a 72-year-old man who lived like a teenager. I stayed with him for almost 6 years, and it was during the summer of my second year that I had this experience. Baker and I had become very close, and he knew more than most did. He wasn't a person that judged, which was very rare for me. One night, during a prolonged episode of sleeping issues, I was abruptly awoken to find my wardrobe doors opening and closing. Very slowly to begin, but then faster and faster until they began to slam. My father was staying the night with us, and he barged into the room with Baker and tail, when the noise and movement suddenly stopped. They both proceeded to go mental at me, thinking that I'd been the cause of the noise. All I could do was apologize and keep my mouth shut. What good would saying anything do? My dad doesn't tolerate anything to do with the hidden. Baker, on the other hand, listened to me very intently, and when I would reveal things to him, he was open-minded. A few days later, myself and Baker spoke about what happened. I gave him the facts as best as he would understand them. By this time, I'd become very knowledgeable of the occult, or the hidden. This was a must, as it was the only way to make sense of the things going on in my life. I was very lonely during this period of my life. It's not easy living with secret knowings, surrounded by people that seem to sleepwalk through life. Regrettably, I tried to take my life during this stage, but life would not let me go, and I'm still here. Events like this had been going on for some time, hence the lack of sleep. I would dream of being held down so that I couldn't move, feeling like many unseen hands were forcing me still. I would always manage to struggle free and wake up, often finding beings like dark shadows or entities cloaked in electromagnetic distortion, beyond the range of my sight at the time. It felt like I was always being tested for weakness. This made me stronger, though, each passing encounter. These beings seemed to know that they play a dangerous game. They take their chances trying to mess with me, always trying to isolate me more and more. They risk me figuring them out. Each time my bravery holds out. I learn more every day, but this wouldn't help my flatmate Baker a few nights later. Our rooms are right across from each other's, and the walls aren't very thick, so sound carries. I woke up to what sounded like screams and panic coming from Baker's room. I immediately shot up half asleep and barged into his room. Baker was being dragged out of his bed feet first by a large black shadow entity. He was absolutely terrified. I, who was vastly calmer than him, stood my ground. The being turned and looked right at me. It had no real face, just what looked like small black holes leading into oblivion for eyes. Its form was a heavy black smoke, and it moved sadistically around. I had found useful information from a contact online about dealing with such entities. You must stand in the moment without fear and set ego aside, placing your hands over your heart and see golden energy filling the room and everything in it. No thought or emotion can distract you during this process. Your focus must remain within your heart space. For me, this was relatively effortless as I had been practicing the art of Zen coupled with my enhanced vision. And I was able to quickly stop this attack on my friend. As the light engulfed the room like a crashing wave of golden water, the being almost immediately evaporated out of this reality. Baker was very shaken. He'd urinated himself and all over the bed. I quickly took action and sorted him out, made both of us a cup of tea, and we talked. Baker seemed to age overnight. In the morning, his infectious youth had all but gone, and he was never really the same after that. But over time, he managed to move on, selling the house and moving away. My current situation is very different. I'm now well into my 30s and I live alone. My contact with the outside world is work and family, but only when necessary. My life is consumed with the advancement of my own inner knowledge. I do have contacts all over the world, people that I have found like me through the years of searching. They've greatly helped me find peace with my gifts, and as a result, I've aided a number of individuals through similar experiences. The last experience is more of a group of happenings. The first started a year ago and accumulated a few nights ago. Over the years, my senses, vision, and mind have been molded and upgraded in a way to perceive reality from a deeper level. Reality to me is an interwoven mix of different densities of energy and consciousness, both within and without. It started with strange markings, circular burns and rashes to begin with, then pains under my left thumbnail. The thumbnail looked like a syringe of some kind had been inserted under, leaving track marks. This happened multiple times during the night. One night, I woke up to a loud bang in my room, and I found my laptop 4 feet away from my bed on the floor, and a being standing very still in the middle of my room. The room filled with a stench of rotten eggs and decay. The being was a Zeta Reticulan. They are a kind of gray, not like the drones many see, but an ancient, dead race of beings, brought back here after humans tampered with things that they shouldn't have. The Zeta was pale and gray in color. It looked very old and withered. It had big, dull, black oval eyes that seemed devoid of anything. A dead, soulless creature. It looked at me for a time and then shifted out of this reality. I followed it with my now more powerful inner vision that can see beyond my physical limitations. It moved into what many would call the astral plane, but is more accurately a field of mental and emotional distortion that merges with the fourth dimension. The Zeta seemed to be taking generic information from me to somehow prolong its existence. It also had what looked like holographic technology around its field, funneling in distorted energy to keep it alive. This is where I left it. Over the next few weeks, I bought an axe and a tactical knife that sat next to the bed. I figured if it could affect physical matter when manifested, it could be killed. So I waited. My wait was in vain, however, as it or they never made the same mistake again. No, now I'm in a deep sleep whenever an encounter happens. The markings and the rest still persist to this day. The next part of this encounter happened just a few nights ago. I walked into my bedroom to get ready for a well-needed sleep. My room is a quite peaceful place, with my favorite books, many plants neatly placed in the space. I sat down on my bed and had the sudden awareness of something intruding my field. Field being the mental heart energy surrounding and permeating my form. To the left of the room, the energy signature of the static shifted and changed, becoming much more jagged in nature. A shadow being began to emerge from the distortion. However, I had learned that many times these were false beings, set to mask the actual entity behind it. As I began to tune my focus in and see beyond this facade, I saw something unexpected. What stood before me was a 10-foot-tall black cricket with large black eyes. It had 4 legs that jutted out at its sides and were serrated on the outside. The black coloring moved to more of a brown with light hints of green as I focused on the inner legs and underbelly. It had a large, almost flat back tail that was covered in bumps and was separated into sections that moved in an almost concertina fashion as it flexed its exoskeleton. Its upper torso was tall and slender compared to the lower half. It had 2 large arms that had 3 fingers on each. They were long and thin and completely black. Its chest was much like the tail, sections, and they got fewer as it got closer to the head. The coloring going from black at the head and lighter brown. It had strange white marks up the chest which looked like scars. And its head was massive and black, with black pincers at the mouth. 2 large antennae, constantly twitching. The smell that filled the room was that of rotten vegetation or damp compost. This thing was very impressive, but I could sense from it that it was more like a drone, something of a hive mind. When I looked into this energy, it led me to a massive black cube. This was an ancient rogue, artificial intelligence cube created by an alien race long ago, in the Orion system somewhere in what you could call the 8th dimension. I could see that this thing had enslaved countless forms, turning them into insectoid drones using technologically enhanced genetics to take them over, like some sort of living virus. I got the impression that these insectoid beings were not too dissimilar to us at one point, eons ago. After viewing this, I was shot back into my immediate physical situation, where this being telepathically showed me all of the aforementioned experiences, and this messenger for the AI cube was at the heart of them all. Right from the first time I'd ever felt fear to now. After this being shifted out, and I was left to process what I'd witnessed, a later investigation with my inner group found that these beings are lost, seeking a future that isn't possible for them. And the AI cube that I saw is a concern that is being dealt with by more than just the hidden. To conclude, my journey is far from over, and there's so much more to say, but this will do for now. Whether you believe me or not, the information and experiences that I've shared, they're real as real gets, I'm afraid. The reality you exist within is far more complex and strange than most would be prepared to believe. or even imagine. Until next time. When my daughter was around 4, she began to talk about the last time. She'd say things like, "Yeah, but that was what happened last time, not now. When I was older than you, not when you were my mom," when talking about things that she remembered. One day, we were sitting on my bed, having a random conversation before bedtime. When in conversation she said something like, "But I was your grandma then. I died before you were born, so I wanted to meet you. When your sister died, I had to wait until you had a daughter. I was a twin, but my twin was stillborn. My sister never took a breath, and my daughter had no idea. There's no way that she could have known at 4 years old. I've heard many stories of this happening in one way or another. Children remembering things from past lives. My kid sure did. I'm curious how many children out there are actually speaking about their past lives and are maybe misunderstood or corrected. Just putting it out there. Pretty interesting stuff. In September 1993, I was a ride operator for one day at the Puyallup Fair, now the Washington State Fair. I had stumbled across an ad in the local paper about the fair's return, and the opening night headliner being none other than Frank Sinatra. Under the colorful bubble letters that said, "Do the Puyallup," in small print, there was a help wanted sign, saying to bring the fair to life, there were many jobs available that needed filling fast, and with no experience necessary to apply in even smaller print. Excited to make a couple extra dollars along with the opportunity to see Frank Sinatra live, I called the number listed at the bottom of the ad. A pleasant woman took my information over the phone and told me to be at the East Fairgrounds gates at 6 a.m. September 10th, 11th, and 12th. I had been hired for the whole weekend. She gave me the name of the person who'd be coordinating everything and said to find him when I arrived to get the details on what station I'd be running. I thanked her, and we hung up. When the line disconnected, I sat back and said a silent prayer to my mom in heaven. We're going to see this show, I promise. My mom had never gotten to see Frank Sinatra in concert before she passed. We would always joke about taking a mother-son trip down to Vegas to watch him perform, but by the time I was old enough, it seemed God had other plans for her. Opening day, I'm outside of the East Gates at 6 o'clock, along with a dozen others who all look equally as qualified to be running the heavy equipment as I was. When the gate opens, a man walks out, and one by one calls our names off of a list, gives us a red Do the Puyallup staff vest, along with the location of where we'd be reporting to. Myself and another guy named Chris received the prestigious job of the Funhouse ticket takers. As you might have guessed, it involved taking tickets at the Funhouse. Chris and I walked across the fairgrounds where we were met by another worker who showed us how to operate the Funhouse. We were instructed to remind people of the rules that were already posted on a wooden sign next to the entrance, and then given a brief rundown of how to turn everything on and off via the control board. He said, simple enough.
See these 3 buttons? Green turns it on, blue turns it off, and red is the emergency shutoff. You need a key to reactivate the funhouse if you hit the emergency shutoff. I'm going to be the only one with the generator key, and I'm also going to be all over the grounds. So, just don't hit that button. All right?
Me and Chris both nod our heads. The man says good, and walks away to meet the other group of new hires. That was that. We were now qualified to handle this heavy machinery. Thankfully, the only real electric moving parts of the funhouse were the lights, the spinny tunnel, and the room of mirrors that rotated around. I wasn't stressing out too much. This job did indeed feel simple enough. And for the most part, it was. Chris and I would alternate breaks, and he didn't have a problem when I asked if he'd cover my shift during the Frank Sinatra set later that night. September 10th, the Puyallup Fair saw a record number of attendance. It was hot, and every attraction had a line stretching in a snake-like manner between the small gates. It only started to calm down when the opening acts began to hit the stage. From across the fairgrounds, I could hear muffled guitars and drums over cheers and claps of the crowd that were slowly filling the grandstands. I knew Frank Sinatra went on at 8. At 7, as planned, Chris went on his final break, leaving me to man the funhouse solo. During this time, a brother and sister that couldn't be older than 9 or 10 stroll up the metal-grated stairs and hand me their tickets. As I'm reading aloud the safety rules, I notice, unlike her brother, the sister seems less than excited to go inside. I watch her bored expression stay on her face, even when they walk in the spinny tunnel entrance. A couple minutes later, I'm flipping through a fair magazine, and I hear the funhouse exit doors open behind me. I turn around, and out from the fake fog that's pumping in the doorway, the sister emerges, alone. I ask, "Where's your brother?" Without a care, she says, "I don't know. He must have got lost." Not wanting to leave my post to search for this kid, I say, "Well, do you want to go back in and find him?" Her previously dull expression turns into a smile as she replies with, "No." And for a couple more minutes, we stand together in silence, watching the exit, each minute passing, dwindling my hope of her brother successfully navigating this without me having to rescue him. The sister kept that nasty little grin as she'd scan around the funhouse exterior, almost like she had X-ray vision and could see her brother scared somewhere deep inside. Seeing this, I knew she wasn't going to be any help. "Where's your mom and dad?" I ask. Her eyes stay locked on the funhouse as she replies, "Not here." Okay. And of course, nobody else in the line at this time. So, I tell this grimy little devil child that I'm going to go get her little brother. To stay here, don't touch anything, and if you see anyone wearing a red vest like this, as I pat my own, tell them where I am. Being a full-grown adult, I'm able to swiftly gain a sense of direction in each room while I search for this kid. Eventually, I find him. He's crumpled on the floor, sobbing in a corner of the rotating mirror room. Every couple of seconds, the mirrors slowly move into another position, forming groups of triangles intertwining with each other. It's grueling how slow these mirrors take to open and close while I walk from spot to spot like a Chinese checkerboard, all while saying, "I got you, bud. I'm here." When I reach him, even with my encouraging words, he still bolts away from me to another part of the grid just as the mirrors close again. This happens a couple of more times until I finally start using a corralling method, moving him toward the exit. After what seems like forever, I hear the crying turn into a yelp and the sound of shoes running downstairs, and then out the exit of the funhouse. The mirror room became quiet, and I stared at 1,000 reflections of me in the rotating mirrors, feeling like a hero. But this wouldn't be a story worth writing about if it ended here. Waiting for the mirrors to change, I feel the whole funhouse give a violent shake, along with the screech of metal coming to a sudden rest. The mirrors that were rotating begin to lock, and without a doubt in my mind, I'm certain that little brat pushed the red shut-off button as a gesture to show how thankful she was for me saving her little brother. The lights in the mirror room click off, and for a moment, everything goes dark before the emergency lights turn on and start a flicker pattern that was repeated every couple of seconds before returning the room back to black. My reflection looking more and more hopeless with each interval of white blinking lights. Countless attempts to scream for help had eventually left my throat raw. And I was now the crying child, crumpled on the floor. By now, I think, even when Chris gets back here, he's still going to need to wander the fairgrounds to find the guy with the keys. The tears really start pouring now when I heard a quiet rumble from the grandstand crowd and the unmistakable big band intro of I've Got the World on a String ring out from muffled horns. Frank Sinatra had started, and I'm trapped inside the fun house. I remember saying out loud, "I'm sorry, Mom," before melting further into the floor, accepting my fate. Now, a friend tells me this next part could have been my mind playing tricks on me while under a stressful situation. And it could very well be just that, but while I was laying on the floor, I started to smell a very specific perfume that my mother used to wear. Immediately, I shot up into a sitting position, not knowing whether this made me want to cry more or feel comfort. I gave a deep inhale, and I swear, if I closed my eyes, I could have sworn she was sitting right next to me. The smell was literally that intense, so intense that I got up and started looking through the two-way mirrors, cupping my hands over my eyes and pressing my face against the glass. I couldn't see any indication that someone had made their way up to me. But while investigating the different mirrors surrounding me, I caught the reflective plastic of a fire exit sign during one of the white flashes. The light inside the exit sign was burnt out, so I hadn't noticed it. Of course, this garbage funhouse would have a burnt-out fire exit, I thought to myself. This wasn't going to help me anyways, because the glass panels wouldn't budge until the funhouse was turned back on. I was literally trapped. Through the noise of the fair, if I tried to focus, I could hear Frank Sinatra singing, "Fly Me to the Moon." But while the brass section is going off on their solos, another noise grabs my attention. It sounds like it came from outside the funhouse. And again, I'm not saying this wasn't another trick of my mind, but it sounded exactly like my mom was out there. It was quick, and only one sentence. But clear as day, I hear, "Watch for cuts." Be it the lasting bond a mother has with her son, or the growing claustrophobia I was starting to experience, somehow I knew exactly what she meant by this. I took off my red staff vest and wrapped it around my fist. Then I proceeded to do the best Mike Tyson impersonation I could to one of the glass panels, and after a painful first attempt, my second swing brings the mirror down. I'm definitely not returning to this job again, so I don't think twice as I walk through the glass to the emergency exit, down the back stairs and out the back door. I shake out my vest, put it back on while running through the crowd, trying to make it to the grandstands. Nobody stops me because I have a staff vest on. I'm able to get side stage just as Frank Sinatra is hitting the final note for My Way, and the piano starts Summer Wind. I watch the rest of the set, now with tears of joy. When the show concluded, I threw my vest in the garbage and filtered out the crowd, knowing whatever paycheck I would have made wasn't going to pay for the damages I made to the fun house. But it was all worth it in the end.
No survivors, that's what I'm saying. So, you guys hear the one about the car that went to the doctor? The doctor said, "Ooh, we'll be right back."
Neo Retro FM, live from Olympia, Washington. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Modern music programming. NeoRetroFM.com. Hi everyone, Amanda Jane here. Taking a moment to talk to you about something my husband Ryan and our band, Forget Me Not, are doing this summer. We're partnering with Foundation ESD and their Nourishing Network program to help families in need all summer. you can help support too. It just takes streaming our music all summer long as we continue to donate 100% proceeds to the foundation. Visit conductedbyforgetmenot.com for more information and join us in making No Student Hungry a reality. To learn more about the Foundation ESD and their various programs, please visit foundationesd.org or conductedbyforgetmenot.com.
Tough crowd. Well, if you guys don't like my jokes, we'll just get back to the show then, huh? I'm out of here.
When my cousin was in high school, she used to babysit. The kids that she would babysit were around my age, so I'd often go with her. Their parents had night jobs, so when my cousin put the kids to bed, her and I would fall asleep on their living room couches. Until sometime in the wee hours of the morning, when the parents would come home, pay my cousin, and we'd drive home with the sunrise. I had a blast at that house, but I remember my cousin always hated babysitting there. And the morning drive home was always quieter after we'd leave. Knowing now that she was probably trying not to scare me as a child, she'd always make the excuse that she didn't get a good night's sleep because the couches are uncomfortable. I offered many times to switch her couches, but she'd always say no. How this house was set up is the kids have bedrooms upstairs. We sleep on the couches downstairs. Her couch is across from mine, with a coffee table in between us. One night, when we were there, she didn't know I was still awake. I watched her slowly stand up and tiptoe to the kitchen, using gentle steps not to creak the floorboards. I watched her return with a butcher knife, then slide it under the cushion of the couch before laying back down. I shot up from the other couch, accidentally scaring the shit out of her. She whisper screams at me, "Why are you awake? Go to bed." I reply, "Why do you have a butcher knife? Are you stealing stuff?" She quickly says, "No, it's fine. Please go back to bed." The request this time sounded more distraught, but I'm 8 years old, so I persist. Only then, my whisper yell is interrupted by a tapping on their basement door, located next to the couch my cousin is on. I know the tapping didn't come from the front door because that door is on my wall. Making eye contact with my cousin, I knew I didn't have to ask if she heard it. Her hand slowly glided under the couch cushion and retrieved the knife that she'd stashed. Then, put her finger to her lips, motioning for me to stay silent. So we just sat there, staring at each other, as she hugged the butcher knife against her chest, our exhaustion being momentarily paused each time the tapping would start again. Soon, the tapping was accompanied by the door handle jiggling. This is the first time I've ever seen or heard this, but my cousin's behavior, I assess that she's experienced this on previous days. And without a clue as to what could be on the other side of that door, I didn't say a word. Through the blinds behind me, over the remaining hours of the night, each little bit of light that made its way through meant that we were much closer to getting back home. When we heard the car pull in the driveway, my cousin runs to put the knife back, and then we both pretend to be asleep on the couches, as the father unlocks the door, softly shakes my shoulder, saying, "Good morning." Little did he know, we've been awake all night. When my cousin is gently nudged awake, she treats it like normal, thanks him for the payment, and we leave. We were so tired, I don't know how she managed to drive us home that morning. I dozed off in the car before she even put the keys in the ignition. Later, she knows that she has some explaining to do, so she takes me to Baskin-Robbins, and we eat ice cream on the table outside, as she tells me that, in fact, that was not her first time experiencing those noises, and how she's also heard the sound of a man crying down there. I asked if she's ever opened the basement door to see if anyone was on the other side. "Never," she says. Now, fast forward a decade, and we're at a barbecue, and I ask, "Hey, did you ever tell that family about their haunted basement?" "They already knew," she said. "They were just hoping that we wouldn't find out." I was like, "What? They knew about it?" She was told that the owner, before that couple, had hung himself in the basement. They really didn't have anything else to share with her. Just, "Hey, did you know that you guys have a ghost?" "Yeah, guy hung himself there and won't leave." My cousin told me they said they'd work on it, whatever that means. They used to pay a lot of money for my cousin to babysit, and now we understood why. Even back when she quit, they offered to double her pay. But I guess those sleepless nights, snuggled up to a butcher knife, hoping the past owner doesn't introduce himself, just wasn't worth the money they offered. So, my story has two parts, a then and a now. When I was a kid, back in 2002, 2003-ish, my parents had bought a 3-acre plot of land and a small house. The area surrounding was all wooded, heavily loaded with trees, except for the little plots near the road where the houses were. Basically, behind our houses were the woods. So myself, my friends, we'd always go back there and play. Sometimes I'd even go alone. At the time, it wasn't really anything scary. It felt like we had this tremendous, secluded space all to ourselves. And as we got more comfortable with the woods and a bit older, we started to venture more. Usually, we wouldn't go past this little area that was easily identifiable by our parents. It was a grove of red pines planted in rows. They looked like they'd been intended for maybe telephone poles or something, but were long abandoned. Lots of things had started to grow around them, even over them. Some had fallen down at some point and were now completely suffocated by ivy and everything else. More than once, we found animal carcasses in that section. And although I chalked it up to just normal wood things, I never liked spending too much time there, as the area always felt weirdly silent. I remember that after spending more time in the woods, I truly started to get the feeling like someone was always watching you, even though the area was much further away from the houses and the road. Many times I saw something out of the corner of my eye, and I remember there were a couple of times I even felt the urge to move abruptly to the edge of the trees, convinced I'd meet someone face to face. I found myself having dreams about the space. It happened more than once where I was in the area, standing amongst the red pines, and every time I saw this large creature, probably supposed to be represented 8 to 10 feet tall, much taller than myself, made completely of wood and plants, vines, rocks, all earth stuff, but somehow formed into a creature. It definitely wasn't human, but it did evoke some sort of instinctive fear in me. I don't think it meant me any harm, but somehow I also knew it didn't like me being there, being in its section of the woods. So now for the now. It's 2020, and like most people, I've been getting out more, just walking a lot. I've always chosen the wooded path type routes, because the woods are just more calming when you live in a city of concrete. Recently, I've been coming across a growing number of animal carcasses, which is odd considering these paths, though wooded, are still relatively well-traveled paths. And there haven't been any other issues on the path, like overgrown trees or garbage. Those seem to be taken care of routinely, and these carcasses look like they've been there for weeks. But they weren't there the day before, and they are gone the next. Normal animal stuff, right? I might think so too if the hair on the back of my neck didn't stand up constantly while I was near those trees. I'm taken back to the place where I feel something is watching me, and is so close that it could reach out and touch me. So I did what anyone would do. I went somewhere else to walk, but it won't go away. I can feel it near me, hiding in the shadows cast by leaves, trees. It doesn't want me gone, but it just seems to be watching. And when I begin to feel it, the animal or bird noises around me all go silent. I don't know what it is, but I'd like to just believe maybe it's something positive, something not meant to harm me, but also meant to protect the forest somehow. I like to think of it as some sort of forest guardian, but I'm curious if anyone else has experienced this presence in the woods. Several years ago, when our kids were much younger and still very much at home, my husband and I had purchased a home to move our growing family into. The home was a 1920s Dutch colonial-style home, and it very much still had its original decor. The house had been available at auction, essentially an estate sale that included the home. Quite a dream, actually. Authentic 1920s-style furniture and art throughout the whole home. The exterior was in pristine condition, freshly painted, and if not, then it was well taken care of. Aside from the dust that had collected, the interior was just as immaculate. By the time we'd officially moved into the home, I was pregnant with baby number 3, my youngest son. So, putting the house together was a slow job. We did it in pieces, to say the least. We hadn't experienced anything strange in the house. Except for my nightmares. They were a bit crazier. This was not a red flag for me or anything strange, as I'd experienced weird dreams each time I was pregnant. I attributed a lot of this to stress of a new home, hormones, the usual. However, after just a few months of living in the house, my daughter, who was 5 at the time, started to become increasingly more afraid of sleeping in her own room. She refused to go upstairs alone, crying constantly, saying that the dark was going to get her. It's hard to say that I ignored her concerns, because later I would learn that they were likely real, but in all honesty, I really thought this was typical 5-year-old stuff. Every child, at least of mine, has been afraid of the dark at some point. After letting her sleep with us for several nights, we had to put our foot down, and eventually she was back in her room sleeping. But this was incredibly short-lived. Our daughter ran into our room middle of the night screaming, crying hysterics. I was actually a bit afraid and not sure if it was valid or not. I gestured for my husband to go look and check for monsters. As my daughter laid cradled in my arms, I felt her shaking. She was so afraid. I anxiously waited for my husband to return, and when he did, he said nothing was there, everything was fine, and that we should get some sleep. But what he did next was strange. Sweet, but strange. He grabbed our son from his room, next to our daughter's, and laid his sleeping body in our bed as well. Exhausted, I drifted off, almost immediately. When I woke up in the morning, I found that I was surrounded by my 2 babies. But my husband was missing. I quietly and awkwardly waddled out of bed to meet my husband in the kitchen. He'd made a full-course meal, had the classified spread across the table. I smelled coffee brewing, and he was laser-focused on something as he stared out the window. I sort of stomped my feet to show him I was there without scaring him. It worked. But when he looks at me, I see worry. So before I can enjoy all of this amazing food in front of me, I have to ask, what's wrong? His answer was not what I wanted to hear. The dark that she's talking about, it's here. He set his coffee cup down and asked me to sit. He explained that when he went to our daughter's room, he saw the closet door close. He almost half expected our son to be in there, possibly trying to scare his little sister, but there was no one in the closet. And when he went to leave the room, he heard, "Daddy?" And it gave him chills, like it was something trying to sound like our kids, but couldn't quite get it right. And then a lower, "Daddy?" He saw a dark, looming figure in the corner of our daughter's room next to the closet. He turned on the light and there was nothing. And when he walked past our son's room, he saw the dark looming over his bed. So, my husband had spent the morning looking for new homes. There wasn't any changing his mind. He was convinced that something was in this house. And with another child on the way, we weren't willing to risk anything. Well, friends, that concludes the 10th episode of The Darkest Hour. Hopefully you don't lose too much sleep tonight. And if you dare, join me every Friday night at 11 p.m. right here on neoretrofm.com. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, Amanda, darkesthour@gmail.com, or on Reddit, Amanda Jane FMN. Speaking of FMN, I'd like to leave you with a song from my band, Forget Me Not. This is our latest single, Canary. Thanks for listening. Stay spooky.
Feathers of gold and earth collide. Oh, some came loose when I was learning to fly. Yeah, canary singing in the mind, singing in the mind. Canary singing in the mind, singing in the mind.
Curtains closing on reality. I'm making leaps far beyond what I was bound to be. And lately I've been feeling lucky when I'm gambling. I'm all in, let it spin like a vinyl. Play that record for me. I got that crystal ball vision, it's authentic, you can test it. I'm looking through you tricks and I predict I do it better. I've been dabbling in that black magic witchcraft and I use alchemy. Trade that snapback for a cap.
Feathers of gold and earth collide. Some came loose when I was learning to fly. Canary singing in the mind, singing in the mind. Oh, canary singing in the mind, singing in the mind. Yeah, you can check the bucket list. I've been working 365 and 24/7. As long as I'm breathing, ain't nothing changing. I can't imagine doing things different. Trying to get a hold of my depression. Like pick up the phone when you get the message. And can you tell my better side I miss him? Cause he's been treating me like a stranger. Now all my patients did a flat line. And out of medicine when they get shot down. I sent a chopper to a nosedive. Propeller hit the block, smoking all the punks out. Emotionless cause my mama said you better never let them see you cry. And the best defense is a weakness no one's gonna ever find. So in between the raindrops I'm walking steady and staying dry. I learned a smile was a great disguise to hide all my rage behind. And when I go, I don't want a funeral. Leave my shells so the grass can grow and pray I reincarnate somewhere beautiful, please.